Algeria, of course, like many other countries, has serious leverage of its own. The truth is that the EU needs its relationship with Algeria very specifically. We cannot work without it for the simple reason that what is true for the United Kingdom in terms of our energy supply is true for Europe as a whole. So we have to keep talking, we have to develop a dialogue that works for both sides. A great deal of effort has gone into the old Euromed arrangements since 1995. Governments have spent a lot of money, many conferences have been held, even more papers put together. And if I am to be frank, when I was a minister, I always found those meetings or conferences very frustrating. I could never escape the feeling that we were very good at saying the right things to each other, providing detailed papers full of persuasive but largely aspirational text, but we actually didn't get a lot done. So when President Sarkozy of France decided to re-energise the French relationship with North Africa, the development of a union of the Mediterranean was, I think, something that many of us welcomed and many of us hoped that here at last was an opportunity to really get some action that went well beyond the worthy encouragement of each other to have a better relationship. So I'm glad to see that there are now discussions involving specialists in 6 key areas. I'm sure you all know what they are, but let me just quickly mention them. Transport, economic development, energy, confidence-building measures including civil protection, higher education and human development, and of course private sector partnerships. Now a good deal of time has been spent on negotiating the remits of all 6 groups dealing with those issues. Negotiations have progressed, but again, my impression is that underneath the familiar problems that we have experienced since 1995 have not gone away. Algeria and other partners remain very cautious. The concerns that the EU member states or the Commission are keen to intervene on questions of internal development remains. EU negotiators, of course, do have an agenda, of course they do, and have in the past been very successful in negotiating that agenda with our former partners, but now members from the Central European countries. It's the sort of agenda that the EU always wants. But Algeria stands out as being very cautious indeed in its approach. Unlike some of the former Soviet states, they are not desperate for European Union money. Algeria does indeed have lots of its own, and Algeria is able to sell its energy resources to other countries outside the European Union. So they don't want our calls for partnership from the EU to be a cloak for intervention in internal affairs. It may be a difficult truth to face, but it's one that I think we have to discuss if we're going to have an honest discussion about the topic for today. So now 43 countries make up the Union of the Mediterranean, and the funding, of course, comes largely from the European Commission. There is a voluntary funding process for Arab states involved, and altogether it produces a budget of about 20 million euros. And that is not a fortune in a world that has become rather blasé about talking about multiples of billions when discussing the banking crisis. Having said that, it is a basis for undertaking some joint activity. However, the process does seem to be ponderous and it is halting. Again, my impression is that the two sides have rather differing views about how to progress the relationships. We in Europe want lean organisation. We say we want real projects. But all too often, this seems to have the effect of, to achieve an agenda which is by no means seen as being without the old agenda by our interlocutors in the region generally, and I think very particularly in Algeria. So perhaps we should think more about what we mean when we call for more confidence-building measures between the two groups of countries. We're a very diverse group, 43 in the EU, and of course the countries, the borders of the Mediterranean and the Adriatic, with of course the exception of Libya. I think some real projects would make so much difference. That's a conviction that I had 8 years ago, sitting around a table as a trade minister, and I still have today. Let's look at what those projects might be, because they are on the table, they are under discussion. The depollution of the Mediterranean Sea, the establishing of maritime and land highways, civil protection initiatives to combat natural and man-made disasters, a Mediterranean solar energy plan, the inauguration of a Euro-Mediterranean university in Slovenia, the Mediterranean business development initiatives focusing on micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, those are all specific projects that could be taken forward. They have got a lot of paperwork around them already, and those are things that genuinely could be progressed. They're all great ideas, and there is much to celebrate in taking forward an agenda like this. So I hope that the Barcelona-based Secretariat is now able to get some real support from member countries on that sort of agenda. Now, I talked briefly about the UK's energy relationship with Algeria, and that, of course, is reflected, as I said, for Europe as a whole. The EU is Algeria's largest trading partner, and we take just under 2/3 of all exports from Algeria. So the Algeria-EU Association Agreement, as we're all aware, is the framework for the Euromed, in the framework of the Euromed partnership, was signed in 2002, and of course it sets out the framework of that relationship, including trade. And I think it is important that the volumes of trade between the EU and Algeria have grown enormously in the last 5 years. Indeed, 70% of Algeria's exports are, of course, to the EU in energy. So we take 2/3, and 70% of everything is on the energy front. And it's now the 3rd largest supplier of energy to the European Union as a whole, and the value of that last year was 28.6 billion euros, a huge amount of money. But the trade between the countries of the southern Mediterranean rim is incredibly sluggish. The sad fact is that the region has the lowest intra-regional trade of any region in the world. There has been some progress. Algeria has endorsed the European Union's new pan-Euro-Mediterranean system of accumulation of origin. That sounds a long title. What that basically is a system to try to promote procedures which will allow the manufacture of a product for export to the EU in more than one Euromed country without losing preferential tariff rates. Now that might sound a bit esoteric, but I think it's an enormously important thing that has happened there, that a product can be produced in more than one country without using those preferential rates. And it is hoped that by doing that, Europe has given some sort of help for more intra-regional trade on that basis.